Hey guys, and welcome, and thank you for clicking on this video. Please consider subscribing. So in this video, I'm going to go ahead and talk about men who took their families' lives. I want to start off with Chris Watts, but first I want to say condolences go out to the victim's family. So the first guy that we're going to go ahead and talk about is Chris Watts. Christopher met Shannon in 2010, and they were married November 3rd, 2012. They had two beautiful daughters, Bella Watts, that was born on December 17th, 2013, and Celeste Watts, but was called Cece, was born July 17, 2015. They lived in Colorado in a 4-bedroom home, which they had purchased in 2013. Chris was employed by Anadarko Petroleum, while Shannon was an independent representative for the multi-level marketing company selling the product called Thrive. On August 13, 2018, Shannon returned home from a business trip from Arizona at around 1:48 a.m. after being driven home by her friend Nicole. Chris was home with the girls and had watched them while Shannon was away on her business trip. Later that day, Shannon and the girls were reported missing by Nicole. She became concerned when Shannon missed a scheduled OBGYN appointment and failed to return any of her text messages. After she missed a business meeting, Nicole went to the Watts home at around 12:10 p.m. When the doorbell and the knocks went unanswered, Nicole then notified Chris, who was at work, and then called the Frederick Police Department. An officer arrived to conduct a welfare check at around 1:40 p.m. When the officer arrived, Chris shortly arrived after and gave the officer permission to search the home, but there was no sign of Shannon or the girls. The searchers discovered her purse containing her phone and keys. Her car still contained the girls' car seats, and they were in the garage. Her wedding ring was found on the master bed. The FBI and the Colorado Bureau of Investigation joined the investigation the next day, August 14th. Chris initially told officers he had no idea where Shannon, Bella, or Cece might be, and had not seen his wife since 5:15 a.m. on the 13th when he left to work. He gave interviews to a couple of the Denver TV stations pleading for their return. Watts was arrested late on August 15th, 2018. Chris had failed a polygraph test and confessed to murdering Shannon. He asked to speak with his father before confessing, according to the affidavit. He was having an affair and claimed he asked for a separation from Shannon. He claimed that Shannon had strangled the girls in response to his request for a separation in a fit of rage. He then strangled her and then transported the bodies to a remote oil storage site where he had worked at the time. The authorities located the bodies of the Watts family on the property of his former employer, Anadarko Petroleum, on August 16th. Chris was fired on August 15th, the day of the arrest. The girls' bodies were found hidden in oil tanks. Shannon and her unborn baby boy Nico were buried in a shallow grave nearby. On August 21st, Watts was charged with the murders. In an interview with Dr. Phil, Watts' lawyer claimed that he confessed to killing Shannon after an argument regarding the divorce. During the murder, Bella walked in. He then told her that Shannon was sick. He loaded Shannon's body and the girls, without their car seats, into the back seat of his work truck. Later, he smothered them, one after the other, with a blanket of theirs. Watts pleaded guilty to the murders on November 6th. The death penalty was not put forward by the district attorney on the request of Shannon's family, who did not wish for any further deaths. They were supportive of the decision to accept the plea deal. On November 19th, he was sentenced to 5 life sentences, 3 consecutive and 2 concurrent. Without the possibility of parole, he received an additional 48 years for the unlawful termination of Shannon's pregnancy, and 36 years for 3 charges of tampering with a deceased body. After this, he had his $5 million bail revoked and was immediately remanded into custody. On December 3rd, 2018, Watts was moved to an out-of-state location due to security reasons. On December 5th, 2018, he arrived at a high max security in Wisconsin, where he continues to be serving his life sentences. A lot say that Chris Watts had started seeing another woman less than 2 months before he killed his family. Although the affair hasn't been identified as a possible motive, Watts has refused to answer any questions about why he strangled his wife and smothered his 2 beautiful little girls and disposed of them in an oil field. The second guy we're going to talk about is Christian Longo. Christian Longo grew up as a straight-laced and devoted Jehovah's Witness in Michigan and married a fellow churchgoer, Mary Jane Baker, when he was 19. The couple had 3 kids, Zachary, Sadie, and Madison. On December 19th, 2001, the body of 4-year-old Zachary Longo was found floating face down in a marina in Oregon. Shortly after, Sadie Longo's body was also discovered, weighed down with a rock in a pillowcase tied to her ankle. The nation's worst fears came true when 8 days later the bodies and the remains of Mary Jane and Madison Longo were found stuffed in suitcases floating near the Longo's apartment. Autopsies later determined the 4 victims had likely died of asphyxia, and that there were evidence of blunt force trauma on the face of Mary Jane. There were also some evidence, although disputed, that Zachary and Sadie died from drowning. After each body was discovered, investigators placed the only missing member of the family, Christian Longo, on the FBI's 10 most wanted list. Longo was on the run, nowhere to be found, and the FBI continued to investigate why a seemingly perfect husband had murdered his whole entire family. The investigation showed that Longo had been involved with criminal behavior for quite some time. After leaving the New York Times distribution company, Longo attempted to launch his own company, which became a financial disaster. As his debt grew, Longo began making counterfeit checks from his clients' checks. Despite his dishonest way of making money, he continued purchasing expensive cars and taking extravagant vacations. Longo's carefree ways ended when he was charged for making counterfeit checks. He was given a light sentence of probation and restitution, but his life changed dramatically. Longo was caught cheating on his wife and kicked out of the church for a long list of misconducts. Claiming he wanted to start a better life, he moved his whole family from Michigan to Ohio. On the day that Mary Jane and Madison Longo were found, it was discovered that Christian Longo was on a plane to Cancun, Mexico, using the stolen identity of a former writer for the New York Times, Michael Finko. After Longo was identified by an American tourist, Mexican officials extradited him to the United States. Longo claimed that in a fit of rage over his poor financial situation, his wife Mary Jane killed his 2 oldest children, and that he had angrily responded by murdering Mary Jane and the youngest child. In less than 4 hours, the jury returned with a guilty verdict of Christian Longo and was sentenced to death by lethal injection. Shortly after the trial, Christian Longo began an appeals process that was estimated to run for 5 to 10 years. In 2011, Longo admitted to killing his whole family and remains on death row in Oregon. The last one I'm going to talk about is James Rupperts. James Ruppert's early life was troubled. His mother, Charity, had told him that she would have preferred a daughter as a second child. His father had a violent temper and held little affection for his 2 sons. His father died in 1947 when James and his brother Leonard Jr. were 12 and 14 years of age. Leonard Jr. became the father figure of the family and constantly picked on James during their upbringing. often taunting him for being a weakling. At the age of 16, James hated his home life that he ran away and attempted to commit suicide by hanging himself with a sheet, but was unsuccessful and returned home. As an adult, James was described as a modest and helpful man who was very quiet. In addition, no police record. By 1975, Rupert was envious of his older brother's successful job and family. James had dropped out of college after 2 years, then trained as a draftsman by 1975. He was unemployed, but never married, and he was still living at home with his mother. His older brother, Leonard Jr., had earned a degree in electrical engineering and had married James's ex-girlfriend. He owned his own home and had 8 children. Charity was frustrated with James not being able to hold a steady job and his constant drinking. She had threatened to evict him from her home on more than one occasion. A month before the massacre, James inquired about silencers for his weapons while purchasing ammunition. His behavior in general became more unusual as he neared the breaking point, battling with deep depression. The night before the murders, James went out, as he did nearly every night, at the 19th Hole Cocktail Lounge. He talked with employee Wanda, a 28-year-old mother of 5. James stayed at the bar until it closed at 2:30 a.m. The next day was Easter Sunday, March 30th, 1975. James's brother Leonard and his wife Elma brought their 8 children to see their grandmother at the house. James stayed upstairs sleeping off the night of drinking, while the other family members performed an Easter egg hunt in the front lawn. Around 4 p.m., James woke up and loaded his .357 Magma and 222 caliber handguns and a rifle, then went downstairs. Charity was preparing lunch in the kitchen, in the company of Leonard Jr. and Alma. Most of the children were playing in the living room. Entering the kitchen, he first shot and killed his brother Leonard, then his sister-in-law, and then his mother. Next, he took the life of his nephew David and his nieces Teresa and Carol. All were in the kitchen. James then proceeded into the living room where he killed his niece Anne and his 4 remaining nephews, Leonard number 3, Michael, Thomas, and John. 1 child had been shot once in the chest. The remaining 10 victims had been shot 3 times to ensure they were dead. The massacre was over within 5 minutes. After spending 3 hours in the house, James finally called the cops to report the shooting. He waited just outside the front door for authorities to arrive. James was found guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder for his mother and brother, but found him not guilty on the other 9 counts of murder by reason of insanity. He received 1 life sentence for each count, to be served consecutively. In June 1995, at the age of 61, he was granted a hearing before the state parole board, but his release was denied. He received another hearing in April 2015. That release was also denied. As of December 2019, James remains incarcerated in the Franklin Medical Center in Ohio. James's next hearing is set for February 2025, when he will be 90 years old.